Hey, everybody, welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, screenwriter, producer, and host Kelly Carlin McCall joins the show. Kelly performed a one-woman show entitled Driven to Distraction, where she touches on her childhood, substance abuse, and her mother's passing from cancer. Currently, Kelly hosts the Humans on the Verge podcast, which talks about how both individual and American culture change and evolve. Her father, George Carlin, is an icon of stand-up comedy who won 5 Grammys for Best Comedy Album, hosted the first episode of Saturday Night Live, and is known for bits like the 7 words you can never say on television. Speaking of her father, in 2022, Kelly won a Primetime Emmy Award for her work on George Carlin, The American Dream. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Hi, Rob. Thank you. I'm just going to make one correction there in that introduction. My very first solo show was Driven to Distraction, but I never did it except to a closed audience. But my run of my other solo show after my dad died was called A Carlin Home Companion, which then also became the title of my memoir.
Talking about the memoir and obviously the spoof of Garrison Keillor, how did you decide on that title?
I was taking a nap. I woke up and it walked right into my psyche. And I wrote it down and thought, okay, that's the name. I was working on trying to figure out a name, and sometimes I just leave it to that part of my creative mind that will do that for me. And it just walked right in, and it just held everything perfectly because we were the opposite of the Garrison Keillor world. And yet it really was like the companion to our home life. So it just was one of those great, great moments of manna from heaven in the creative life.
What was the impetus for writing the memoir?
Well, the memoir came after the solo show. The first impetus was to do a solo show. And I had been a personal storyteller in LA, doing kind of 8 to 10 minute stories in different small story salons and things like that. And because I had done that Driven to Distraction show in 99, I did 2 performances of it to an invited audience. But I put that on the shelf and I stopped doing that art form. Because at that time, it was about 2 years after my mother had died, and I knew I had to get on a stage and wanted to talk about my life. My hero was Spalding Gray, and he really influenced me in being able to feel like you could go on stage and reveal your darkest, crazy thoughts and ideas and ways of looking at the world, and it being cathartic for the whole audience because the humanity was so present on the stage. And I really wanted to do that art form. And being a monologist, I grew up watching a really good one. So that for me was just kind of made sense. And maybe it's genetic too. I don't know. My grandfather was also a great speaker and won the Dale Carnegie Award for Best Speaker of the Year one year. Anyway, but my dad was very uncomfortable with the material of the solo show because I did talk about my parents' addiction in one section of it and talked about it in the way in which it shaped me and then shaped my future choices in my life about picking relationships. But it really made my dad very uncomfortable. And I ended up talking about that in the Carlin Home Companion solo show and the memoir. And it made him so uncomfortable. And my mom had just died. And my whole being, I think, was really about making sure that I always never displeased my father. There's the codependent part of it. And so when he told me he was uncomfortable, he also said to me, I don't want you to change anything. You're an artist. This is your work. Go out in the world and do this. But as a daughter, I couldn't. And so I stopped. I didn't do that. I ended up going to grad school and getting my master's in Jungian psychology and then going into kind of the life coaching world. And then my dad died. And suddenly I was free. When a parent dies, something in you gets freed up. There's more room for you in the world. And when you have a parent like my dad, there's a lot more room in the world for you. And so that urge to be a storyteller and to be a monologist and to take people on a ride through a human life, through a relationship, through family, really came back to me. And it was a terrifying notion when the urge came back because I'd only had that other experience and it went okay, but I didn't know a lot about it. But I'd been having some momentum and a lot of love from the audiences in my smaller storytelling experience. And then I became friends with Paul Provenza. And I told Paul about this urge and this idea I had. And he said, well, can I help you with that? Can I be your director? And Paul is known for many things. The Green Room with Paul Provenza, stand-up, but he's also a very seriously trained actor. So he really understood a lot of that, and a writer also. And with his mentorship, I got the bravery and the courage to get up on a stage and do my work. And it was a very incredible learning experience. And then, as luck would have it, some editor at St. Martin's Press heard me on a podcast and said to his assistant, find out if she's got a book deal. And I happened to be doing my solo show around that time in New York for a few days. I was part of a solo show festival. I was at the Cherry Lane Theater, Black Box, dream come true, getting to do my solo show in New York, my dad's city, getting to take the subway to the Village to be in the theater. And this editor showed up my last performance and we were sold out. And there was Paul sitting outside and she walked up and said, is there any chance, do you think? And Paul's like, oh, you can have my seat. And that is how the memoir came about. It really, really came to me because I guess I'd been in the right place at the right time a couple of times the year before.
How did you and Paul Provenza meet? That's a name I haven't heard about in a while. I remember him doing stand-up probably 30 years ago in the 90s.
What happened after my dad died is a group of comedians kind of came into my life. But one of them was someone I'd already known and was friends with was Rick Overton, another great 80s and 90s comedian. Knew my dad and was friends with my dad and had been connected with him. And we connected. And then he's like, you have to meet my friend Paul Provenza. You just have the same kind of mind and everything like that. And we met. And soon after meeting Paul, not only the solo show idea was coming, but he invited me, I think it was like the first month I knew him or 2 months. They were shooting the first few episodes of The Green Room for Showtime. And I went to all the tapings, and the very first taping, Rain Pryor was on the panel. And I'd never met Rain, but knew of her because she'd had a big famous solo show called Fried Chicken and Latkes, being half Jewish and half Black. And I was always jealous of her ability to do that because I had shut myself up and gone to grad school and made that choice. And I was always like longing to get to know her and all of that. And so she and I connected. So that's how I met Paul. And then after the first season of The Green Room was over, he asked me then to come in and talent produce the second season of The Green Room. So we got to work together in that way also, which was a blast, an absolute honor and a blast.
I've read the memoir and there are so many stories in there. But for you, what is a favorite story when, let's say, you're just out having a conversation with some friends or meeting people for the first time that you like to tell?
Oh boy. There are so many. And I think because of doing the solo show and writing the book, I don't access those stories so much. But really thinking about it, one of the ones that I think kind of sums up the interesting world that we lived in at the times was when my dad did Summerfest in Milwaukee. And I was 9 years old. We had just gone to Kent State, and Kent State had happened the year before, I think, and my dad was playing there. But at the same time, he wanted to kind of educate me to what was going on. And I was young, trying to wrap my head around the fact that children had basically died. It was such a treacherous time to be alive and so terrifying. People think it's terrifying now, and it is in some level, but it was weird in the early 70s too. Really weird, people. It was tough to be an American, especially if you were on the fringe like my dad. And my dad was on the stage, and Summerfest is just this crazy beer drinking, sausage eating festival, lots of musical acts and stuff. And then my dad was out there. I think he was opening for Arlo Guthrie or something like that. But I'm like a young kid, and my mom and I are in the wings watching my dad as we normally did. And the promoter comes up to my mom and says, there's some policemen here because my dad was using some language on stage. This was a place when you're on the stage, the speakers are going throughout this fairground. It is a state fair. Summerfest is a state fair, basically. So my dad's using some of the 7 dirty words, and they're going out. So the promoter's like, yeah, there's some policemen here, and they're upset about the language he's using, and they're going to arrest him when he comes off the stage. And so my mother knew that my dad was carrying some coke and weed in his pockets. as one does in 1971 or 72, and has to warn my father because back then, getting caught with drugs in a place like Milwaukee would be a very serious thing. So my mom walked out onto stage with like a glass of water or a pitcher of water. Never had done that before. My dad's looking at her like, "What are you doing here?" And she's handing him the glass and she like leans over and says, "The cops are here. Do not go off of stage right. Go stage left and empty your pockets immediately," kind of a thing, right? So I'm in on all of this. I'm a kid, but I know what's going on. So now the stakes are high and I know about drug laws and I know that my dad, mom do drugs and all that. And it's terrifying for me. And so he ends up trying to wrap up the show and he's going on and on and on. They finally turn the volume down on him, like he's going to stop because my dad doubles down at this point. Like you have to understand my dad at this point, rebel guy. He's telling stories from the Class Clown album that is just a new thing that's out. It's not even out yet, I think. And he's trying to tell stories. And the minute my mom says they're going to arrest you for your language, he goes right into the 7 dirty words, basically. That's his move. But he ends up getting off stage. We end up going into the dressing room and he's emptying his pockets and mom's stashing the drugs in like the drummer's bass drum or something like that. And then I'm just anticipating this thing that's about to happen, terrified already, probably already crying, when somewhere, somehow, a balloon gets popped. And I think it's a gun has gone off. I am convinced that they are now shooting at us. And I am now hysterical. Mom's trying to calm me down. Dad's trying to do the thing. And then finally, the door opens and the cops are there and they handcuff my dad and do the whole perp walk with him. And there's a famous picture of it, which is just so fantastic with this tie-dye t-shirt and him with this long ponytail and these 2 serious cops. But the great thing about it is that my mom, because they were friends with Lenny Bruce and had been through some arrests with Lenny Bruce back in the day, my mom knew what to do. And so she immediately found someone to help her find a civil rights attorney, basically, because she knew this was a civil rights First Amendment issue. And so the guy came in and Monday morning when they do the little procedure, whatever for my dad. And the funny thing was the witnesses were like one of the cops and someone else. And they were like, "Oh yeah, we thought it was funny. We were laughing," the whole thing. Like they completely undermined their whole position at that point. And my dad got like a $200 fine or something like that for indecent language in public, or I don't even know what it was. But that really kind of sums up the strangeness of being a daughter of someone who was always a rebel, but someone who really pushed up against the edge of the culture all the time. And in that particular era, those early 70s, how fraught it all was, the First Amendment around that and the changing mores of the culture and things like that. So that's one of my favorites.
I don't even know how to follow up with that. That's an unbelievable story. And it reminds me of the bit about the Reverend in Mississippi, where if you don't like it, change the channel. If you don't like listening to it, go somewhere else.
And one of the things that one cop was upset about was that there were some disabled kids in the audience. They couldn't move or they couldn't remove themselves or something. And it was like, they're in wheelchairs and there's adults there. Come on. Like if the adults didn't like it, they would have moved the kids, kind of a thing. So it was a very, very strange moment.
That is definitely odd. Are there other strange moments like that you experienced growing up?
Yes, I think I know what you're hinting at, Rob. So the first story I told was one that we told proudly in our family. And then this other story, too, was strangely enough one we would tell proudly. My dad would tell proudly, which was fun because it was his version of it. And then I got to tell my version of it. So at one point, my parents were very entrenched with cocaine. And part of the problems with cocaine is that you stay up a lot. And my dad would have these 2 or 3 days where he would not sleep. And so he was getting serious sleep deprivation. And we had been in Hawaii and had a really bad vacation, which I also write about in my memoir, another turning point in the Carlin family. But we got home, and that morning, as one does, I guess we were all sleeping in or something, and my dad comes into my room and wakes me up and says, "Kelly, I have something important to tell you." And I'm like a kid, right? And I sit up, I'm like, okay, right? And my parents had been arguing a lot, and part of the Hawaii trip was kind of ruined because they were arguing too much. And I thought he was like, "Mom and I are splitting up." I was like preparing myself for that. And instead, my dad said, I think the sun has exploded, and I think we have about 7 minutes to live. Now, you can imagine what one does with that information as an adult. If you were an adult, you took that in, you'd be like, this man needs help. Seriously, immediately, let's get him some. Whereas I'm a kid and I'm already dealing with my parents' insanity and trying to like smooth things over and make sense out of things. Like that was my job in the house. And so I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, maybe we should go outside and check. So my parents had these very, very thick curtains, blackout curtains, so they could sleep during the day because, well, they were doing a lot of drugs and alcohol. So we parted the drapes and we lived way up in the hills in the Palisades. We come out and it is so bright, it's blinding. And it's one of those LA days where there's like a lot of smog. So there's this kind of weirdness to the air. Also, there's like a weird kind of energy to it. And it's like, wow, this could be happening right now. This might be the thing that's happening. But I'm like, well, maybe it's smoggy or the light's different in LA than Hawaii, or probably wanted to say is maybe you've been up for 4 days and you've lost your mind. But that wasn't my style. So my dad's like, I know. Let's call Joe, our friend Joe Bellardino in Sacramento, see if he's seeing the same thing. So my mother and I are sitting there. My dad is on the phone with his friend. We're only getting half the conversation, which is, hey, Joe, it's George. Yeah, no, I can't talk right now, but I need you to do me a really, really quick favor. This is really important. Okay, we need to do it right now. You need to go outside and check on the sun and see if it's okay. And then he's like a pause, and my dad's like, no, really, I really need you to go do this. Like, really, like right now. And then there's a pause, and my dad like covers the phone and goes, he's checking. Okay, good. Joe's checking on the sun in Sacramento. And then, of course, Joe comes back and he's like, no, George, sun seems okay here. Everything seems to be fine. And dad's like, okay, yeah, okay, great. All right, good. All right, thanks, Joe. Bye. And then click. And then there's just that moment of like, okay, wow, we're at that level now. This is where we're at. Hint number 23, George Carlin, that maybe you need to change your ways a little bit. And so the thing I always kind of tag onto the end of the story is that I was living the kind of life, so were many kids of this era who had parents like this, where you would go to school the next day and the teacher would ask you something like, oh, well, how was your Hawaii vacation, or how was something like that? And I couldn't say anything. I had to say, great, everything's fine. It's all good, which became kind of the theme, the ever-running theme through a lot of my book, which was my ability to smooth things out, make everything fine, and not tell the world about it. Thus, my desperate need now to tell the world about everything. I fully own it.
There are so many great stories about your dad, and we can sit here and talk about your dad probably for 4 hours.
I used to do 90 minutes myself once a night.
When you think about your mom, because your mom often gets glossed over, and your mom worked with your dad and was on the road with him, helped write bits, things like that. What's the story when you think about your mom that epitomizes who she was?
That's a good question. One of the reasons I wrote the memoir and wanted to do my solo show, and one of the things I was really happy about with the documentary that ended up tapping into my memoir and my family's stories so much, was I wanted my mom and her presence in our life, and my dad's life in particular, to be seen and heard, because everyone sees the artist and never sees the village around the artist that it takes for that artist to be able to have the freedom and the headspace in order to do their work. And so my mom was that. She was complicated too. She was definitely an alcoholic and almost died of alcoholism. I was 12 years old when she got sober. But I would say that for my mom, once she got sober, and even before she was sober, when she was sober and functioning and stuff, my mom was one of the most gracious providers of love and listening and care for people. She was a natural therapist, a natural caregiver and caretaker in that way, really, really saw people for who they were. And really, that's what she gave to my dad. She was someone who really, really believed in my dad. And part of her depression and anxiety that led to the alcoholic drinking was that when they first met, they were like comrades in arms. They were two people on the road And then I was born, and then we were three people on the road, Dodge Dart, and my dad was making $7 a night. We were starving, but she believed in him always. And then when we moved to California, because my dad's career had picked up and he'd gotten some TV and he got a big TV show, the John Davidson Craft Summer Music Hall in 66. My dad then had an agent and a manager, and he went off into the studio. My mom was left home with me, the 3-year-old in a new city. She didn't know anybody. And she felt kind of invisible. She became invisible very quickly. It's 1966 and the breadwinner goes out and all that kind of stuff. She kind of lost her purpose and her bearing, but she really believed in people and she believed in my dad. And I think one of the greatest things was when my dad got a lot of success during the 60s and was at the height of his career and was opening for the Supremes at the Frontier Hotel and stuff. And of course, the language thing came up and so hypocritical back then. Red Fox could be down the street doing XXX stuff, but God forbid my dad said ass on stage to a bunch of conservatives in the audience. And he got fired and he had started dropping some acid and kind of having these big revelations about himself and who he really wanted to be. And he really felt like he was doing what he thought he was supposed to be doing to become big on TV and have a career and all that, because he ultimately wanted to be Danny Kaye. That was his first dream. But what became clear to him was, and especially I think the psychedelics helped him see this, was that he'd eliminated himself from his own act. He was only doing characters. He did the hippie dippy weatherman. He did the Indian sergeant. He had all these voices. Very great mimic. Amazing voice guy. But he wasn't on stage. And here was Richard Pryor. He'd already quit Vegas and comedy was going more in that direction. And my dad came to my mom and said, I want to give all this up and I want to do something different. I want to stop entertaining the parents of the people that I feel like I relate more to. My dad was right between the generations. And my dad was making like $12,000 a week in Las Vegas. I mean, this is 69, you guys. This is a lot of money. He had finally made it. And here he was saying I can't do this. This will kill me. And my mom was like set to put a down payment on the American dream home in the valley. And my mom looked at him and said, let's do it. Let's do it our way. And he fired all of his agents and managers. And my mom made a press kit and became his press agent and booking agent. And let's do this, because she believed in the spark of people. My mom could see the spark of people. My mom's the kind of person who walked into a room and the room would light up. When they talk about those people, you know what that means. She would just light up a room. Everyone would, and not in some sort of putting her up on a pedestal, but her warmth and her heart was so big and so powerful. And her greatest legacy was when she died, there were hundreds of people at her memorial who came to pay honor to her because through her AA work, her Alcoholics Anonymous work, she had saved so many lives. She had been there for people. She had encouraged them. She had sponsored them. So that's who my mom was. She was this incredible amateur therapist, wise, wise, wise soul, and also funny and goofy like my dad. I mean, you can't marry a comedian without being funny and goofy yourself. Watching them make each other laugh was always great. And she really got when people were in pain and she was willing to walk with them. She was quite an incredible soul.
Your mom, like my mom, passed away from cancer. Is there any advice that you would give to anyone who has a parent or close relative going through it to help them deal with what the inevitable result is going to be?
With hindsight, my family did not walk through it gracefully at all. She was not feeling well for a long time. I think she avoided going to doctors. I think she knew she'd had breast cancer in her 40s and no recurrence of it or anything, but she was also hepatitis C. So she was having a lot of symptoms and stuff. I think she was probably carrying with her a lot of worry and fear about it. So she didn't go to the doctor until it got really, really bad. And then they thought it was gallstones. And then when they did a scan because they were going to do gallstone surgery, they found 6 tumors on her liver. And it was not breast cancer related. So it was really hep C related. And this is back when they didn't even know what hepatitis C was. It was non-A, non-B. She was a mystery, a kind of a medical mystery. And she had fibromyalgia, another medical mystery in the 80s and the 90s. So when she was diagnosed, my mom died 5 weeks later and the chemo killed her, but she didn't have a lot of time. They were giving her chemo. It was a false hope thing. They should have been really more real with us. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways. And this was 97. Things are different now, but doctors, especially oncologists, refuse to talk about death. they're all about the fight, which is important. I mean, I've had a friend who had breast cancer and it came back 10 years later, and then she got another 5 years because there's a lot of experimental drugs and all of that kind of stuff. And she did that, and she did the fight of that. It's important to fight, absolutely. But I think it's also important to be real about what's going on in the moment. And that's the moment that my family missed out on because we didn't have a lot of practice. We were always the ones who were kind of ignoring the elephant in the room and shoving things under the rug. And we did that with my mom's sickness. We were all pretending with each other that everything was okay, when I think for sure me and for sure my mom felt that it wasn't okay. I don't quite know where my dad's head was at. I think he was in denial a bit because there was a couple of moments, and I write about this in the memoir pretty intensely. So I think the best thing is, and the thing that I hope to practice when it comes to my time or my husband's, and what I've been trying to practice these last 20 some odd years since my mom's death, is to be more and more present for people who are going through that process, hospice or life-threatening disease. But it was a process for me. A friend of mine, a few years after my mom got cancer, also got cancer. I could not deal with it. It was terrifying to me, and slowly able to do that. So everyone has their own comfort zone around it. But if you can in any way get real with each other and talk about it, I think it opens up a space for people. The last death I went through was a friend of mine who had the metastatic breast cancer. It was a good, healthy goodbye. And none of us said the word goodbye, but we all were very much acknowledging what was going on and just got to be in the moment with people and really hold the gravitas of it, but also the beauty of their life and the honoring of them and their wishes and letting them consciously walk through it as well as they can. It's the biggest mystery in life, death, right? And we're all intrigued by it, make up stories about it. We all have a vision of what we hope for it, but it's an opportunity to practice presence and consciousness and to be there for each other in a way that we've never been there for each other before.
For me, I think one of the greatest lessons that I've learned with either family members or some friends passing away is the fact that time is more important than anything else. Like, it's more important than whatever gift you give or whatever, because in everyone's life, people are so busy doing this, doing that. And it's like, oh, well, I'll talk to you next week. Well, next week's not always guaranteed. So even if it's 10 minutes and you just kind of meet up with each other, say, hey, and it could be over the phone or whatever, because he can't be around. But to me, the making the time is the lesson that I've learned to be the most important.
Yeah, I think in general that ability to prioritize things in our time, in our lives, you really, really have to take a stand for it. So friendships, relationships, elders, to take the time, 5 minutes even, like you said, means so much to an elder person who doesn't get a lot of chit chat with people or doesn't get out of the house or whatever. I mean, it's such a gift. And then the same thing with ourselves. We were always putting off our dreams or the parts of us that we wish we could have. Oh, I would love to write more. I would love to paint. I would love to go skiing. Whatever it is, that thing that feeds us, if you're not going to make time for it for yourself, well, no one else will ever do that for you. And that impulse, when someone comes into your mind, that thing where it's like just even a simple phone call, a text, an email, whatever it is, a reaching out, connecting with them, because you're right. You don't know. The next thing you know, wait, what? I mean, it just happened to me recently with this friend of mine, Marty Callner, just died. He was the director of a couple of my dad's first HBO specials. And he and I hadn't talked in a few years, and he kept coming into my mind. I kept thinking, I just need to reach out to Marty. I did not. He died last week. Never got to have that conversation with him.
And it always leads to the what if, right? What if I could have done this? And what if I could have done that? That can lead to all different kinds of roads: depression, anxiety, anger. It just builds and builds, and you won't even be focusing on that. And then all of a sudden, it'll just enter your head and it completely distracts you from what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since we're talking a little psychology here, how did your interest in Jungian psychology, in which you have a master's degree in, kind of begin?
Well, I think both of my parents were very open-minded and seekers. So we always had literature and material in our house, thinking about the big picture of things and curious about how the universe works and all of that kind of stuff. We all went through the new agey 80s together. I was in my 20s. My parents were in their 40s. So we were always seekers and interested in things like that. And what makes people tick, I was always fascinated. When I think about my dad and his work, ultimately, my dad was an anthropologist. He was just observing human behavior, his own to start with, but just then all of ours. And then really observing like the collective behavior when he talked about politics and culture and things like that. So I think I've always had an observable mind and certainly then was in an atmosphere like that. I think for me, it was interesting, and even wanting to tell my stories, it's always about, well, who was I and how was I seeing the world and what was unknown to me? What was unconscious to me that was driving me forward? What story was I telling myself about who I was or who this person was? What was I trying to make up for or compensate through relationships? Very fascinated by that when I kind of woke up to my own unconsciousness, because in my 20s, I made crazy decisions about relationships and things like that. And really the codependence thing, like what shaped me? What formed me? I was fascinated with that question, nature versus nurture and stuff. And after my solo show kind of fell apart, that first one in 99, I was hungry to do something. I was like, oh, well, this life path that I'd chosen kind of stopped in its tracks. I thought, well, maybe I'll go get my master's in something. I love being a student. And so I thought, oh, great, I'll go and be a student for a few years. That'll help me figure out what the hell I'm doing with my life. And I looked kind of at more straightforward academic things and stuff. It was too completely computational, rational based stuff. Academia really is that, unless you're going to be in like a philosophy department or something like that. But I wanted more than just philosophy, which is just kind of sitting around thinking about things. I'm like, how does this apply to life kind of a things? And then I like looked at psychology departments and it was all cognitive behavioral at the time. And it was missing the soul path. What about psyche? What about creativity and all that kind of stuff? And I had read a book called The Heroine's Journey by a woman named Maureen Murdoch. And it really hit me like, oh my God, this is my life. This is my story. She understood the difference between a hero's journey and a heroine journey. She'd studied with Joseph Campbell. And she was a professor at this place called Pacifica Graduate Institute. And so I went up there to check it out. And I was really attracted mostly to the mythology program that they have. There's some mythology programs in America, but this was really the only one that not only studied mythology, but narrative and stuff like that, but also kind of understood it through the Jungian lens of archetypes and Joseph Campbell's lens through comparative religion. And I was already a huge fan of Joseph Campbell. And I really wanted to do mythology because I'm a storyteller and that's what I wanted to do. But the part of me was like, oh, if I'm going to go to grad school and pay all that money, it better be practical on some level. So I went and did counseling psychology there. I could get my master's in it. The myth program was a PhD program. And I thought, at least I'll soak in the other stuff. We had modules of mythology and all that stuff. But I'll also get to learn about the human mind, which does fascinate me also. And did not go to become a therapist and did my internship hours and played for a year being a therapist and knew immediately, like, I cannot deal with this. I've been a therapist since I was 3 years old. No, thank you. But then when I got out, I started my storytelling career around town doing kind of 8 to 10 minute stories and ran into life coaching basically and thought, okay, this is a way to apply to help people find their path, follow their bliss, all of that Joseph Campbell stuff. I can apply what I've learned and understood about psychology to it. And it'll give me a practical thing to do because as an artist, it's really hard to make money unless you're lucky in showbiz, basically. And I had not found that path yet. So that's what led me there. And it's been interesting for me too, because I was all in with that. And I was working with some very successful coaches who were kind of training me in their programs and systems because I'm not a business person at all. And then my dad died. And it was very easy for me to drop all of that and shift into my artistic life. And plus I had a lot to do, taking care of my dad's legacy and stuff like that. And then what happened recently, well, not so recently now, was once my solo show was done and my book was out, and my book had been out about 1.5 years, and my editor at St. Martin's Press really wanted to do a second book with me. And I really wanted to write about the time that had just happened, which was when my dad died and what happened to my life and all these comedians that came in and people who refathered me like Gary Shandling and just like all these mentors I got and Paul and getting a chance to express myself and do this art form that I always wanted to do and what I learned about being on stage and an actor and all of the many, many things I learned. And I wanted to write about that. So I created an outline for them and had a new lit agent. And we worked on it for like 6 months and it just wasn't clicking. For some reason, I couldn't figure out, is this a self-help book? Is this a memoir? The editor wanted a memoir and my agent wanted a self-help book. And I wanted both. And they looked at me like, you can't have both. I was like, okay. And it just kind of all fell apart. And that's when I pivoted. And it's interesting because I had done that outline and kind of walked myself through intellectually what it took for me to get on stage, what I had to get out of the way of with myself, the bold courage I had to have to be willing to be the daughter of someone and tell you story, all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of stuff I worked through. It all kind of assimilated into this program that I created, which at the time was called Women on the Verge, because I knew I just wanted to help women have the courage to express themselves authentically in their lives, whatever that meant. And at the time, I wasn't ready to do it creatively because I didn't feel like I quite knew how to do that or wanted to do that. But I did want to help people who feel like they're dying inside get to live the expressive, authentic self that they are. Through roles, relationships, does not matter, but just to be more of your authentic self, because that's what I had struggled with all throughout my teens and 20s and 30s. And so this thing just came together and I've had good success with it. Ended up calling it Humans on the Verge because it's funny, a lot of my fans on Twitter and a lot of my followers are men because they're fans of my dad's. And so I realized men need this work too. I mean, you guys get a boatload of bullshit to have to live into as women do. It's just a different narrative you guys have to live into. And look at the meaning crisis in America. I mean, so much of it has to do with this thing, people feeling invisible and not heard and not feeling like their authentic self is acceptable to the culture at large. I mean, that's why we're in the trouble we're in right now, I believe. So I've pivoted to Humans on the Verge, and now we've got like a big community, easy way to join and be part of the conversation and get the benefits of being in a really safe space with people who are trying out their expression through different means and different ways, all the way up to like full on individual coaching, creative coaching and or life coaching with me and some other coaches and stuff like that. So we're creating this world at Humans on the Verge. And now I have a podcast with the same name. So I'm having kind of big thinkers on right now. I love the big thinker conversation. I'm always moving from the micro to the macro. That's something I do. And when I used to hear my dad talk about his work, he would talk about it in a similar way. He's like, oh, I talk about the little things that connect us all. And then I talk about the big picture stuff. And I'm like, oh, once again, there's my brain freaking wired like a Carlin. But I do it through this more personal expression work. And the good news is I'm also back to writing, which is really great. I was pretty blocked there after the book deal fell through. I was having the typical second book itis thing. People don't tell you it takes your whole life to write your first book or write your first film or do your first thing, whatever it is. And then people immediately come to you and go, okay, do that again. And you're like, but wait, that just took my whole life to do that. And the courage to finally do it. Like, you want me to do it now in a 2-year span? And I think maybe once you get the next one, you kind of learn how to do that. Or maybe that's just your path is to do that. But it's 10 years since my memoir came out. And I'm finally like in it again, feel like a storyteller again, and actually going to get on some stages this year. And I'm working on an essay right now and have outlined the memoir. I do know what the memoir is going to be once I finish with this essay, which may be part of it too. It may have just gone another direction by starting this new essay. I don't know. But I'm in my creative game again, and it feels really, really good.
For people who want to find out more about Humans on the Verge and the podcast, where can they go find that out?
On YouTube, you can type in Humans on the Verge and you'll get to my Humans on the Verge channel, which has my podcast. Of course, any podcast thing, you can stream the podcast. Humans on the Verge with Kelly, Carlin, McCall. And then if you go to humansontheverge.com, we are actually in the middle of creating a new website. It is still up and running, but it'll be much more interesting in about a month. And you can follow me. I'm active on Blue Sky right now, and it's kelly.carlin, whatever the Blue Sky thing is. And I'm on Instagram as Kelly Carlin is here. And I'm still on Twitter. I refuse to call it the other thing. I don't spend a lot of time there, but I am over there as Kelly_Carlin. And that's really where I loved social media. Early Twitter was my haven. And so I accumulated a lot of followers and a lot of community. And then the algorithm changed, as we all know, about 4 years ago, and nobody sees my things now.
Speaking of being hard, although in a different way here, how hard is it for you to have built your own identity and what you want your legacy to be? Because your dad, in fairness, casts a very large shadow because of how many people know who he was and what he had done.
I really think that that's ultimately part of what Carlin Home Companion was about, was dealing with that shadow and the dance of that. It was very much also about the father-daughter dance, which is a general shadow that daughters live under, as do sons. And the mother-daughter dance is a different one, but this is mine. And I really do think I've found that. I think after my dad died, like I said, there was more freedom for me, and the shadow is still there, but I've really learned to be in as conscious a relationship with it as I can. And part of what that is also is really taking care of his legacy in a very conscious, direct way and letting that be a role in my life I do. And so the documentary is part of that. Some of our other projects we've done. My work at the National Comedy Center in Jamestown, New York, I donated his archives to that place. It is the only place in America that is taking care of the story of comedy. It is a nonprofit. It is like the Smithsonian Archive for comedy. Carl Reiner, my dad, Joan Rivers, you name it. The archives are amazing. The experience there is amazing. So that's something I've poured myself into, is being able to support that institution. I was the first person to say yes from the comedy world to them and donate the archives. They'd already raised a lot of money, but helped them raise more money and more legitimacy. It's now 7 years later. We are still building. People still don't know about it and stuff, but we are still building our relationship with comedy and stuff. So I feel that taking care of my father's legacy is one way of doing that. But also, I mean, I've just had to do a lot of work on myself around this, and it's an onion that I peel every week, every day of my life. It's another, oh, look at that moment that I'm still pleasing him or still this. I mean, it's the work of a conscious adult for any of us, is changing our relationship. And as far as what people think of me and my place and my work, all I can do, and really what I try to learn from my father the most, is all you can do is do your work in the world and let the dominoes fall the way they're going to fall. I can't control what people think about me or anything like that. All I can do is really follow my curiosity and what turns me on, what makes me feel alive, and go from there and try to be kind and good in the world, which both my parents taught me a lot about. Always fight for the underdog, which is also what my parents taught me about, and try to be as conscious about my own unconsciousness as possible. So mine may look a little more shiny or weird or shadowy because of my dad, but it's the work of, I think, of any adult in the act of what we call in the Jungian world, individuation.
The National Comedy Center, you mentioned this in Jamestown, New York. I think it was the hometown of Lucille Ball.
And it was her vision.
Oh, that's the reason that it's in Jamestown.
Yes, they had tried 2 or 3 times before to create something, and Lucy did not want it to be a Lucille Ball museum or the worshiping of Lucy. Lucy was an innovator. She was a real pioneer in the business. I mean, she's the one who got Star Trek greenlit. She was quite a visionary. She wanted it to be about the power of comedy, and the power of comedy to entertain, but also to connect people. And that's what the Institute does. It's really, really cool. It's an amazing place. It's based on genre. You walk in, there's a kiosk, you tell it what your favorite comedians are, TV shows, movies, books, podcasts, and a little bracelet spits out with a computer chip on it that has the algorithm of what you've chosen. And then you encounter these different genres, everything from cartoons to sitcoms to stand-up to late night films, improv, you name it. And you use your little thing, you hit it against a machine and it reads your algorithm, and then it gives you what you know, but it also widens your field a little bit. Oh, did you know that this person was influenced by that? Oh, and these people worked together here once. Did you know that? And the thing is, you're laughing the entire time. The average person, if they only have a day, spends at least 4 hours in there. Most people come for the weekend and go over 2 or 3 days. And you can come back year for year because you can change your algorithm. And every time you do it, it's different anyway. My dad has got the only exhibit that is dedicated to a single comedian because I was the first domino, and that was part of the deal. It was like, oh, we're going to feature him. Great. Here you go. So you get an experience, a deep dive of my dad, but the whole museum is designed for people who are what we call skimmers, swimmers, or deep divers, right? So you can have the people who are like, oh, I just like sitcoms, or da, da, da. And then you've got the kind of like, oh, yeah, I want to know more about this. And then you could go really, really deep into each genre or different people. You could even get an appointment to go into the archives, handle the archives, do actual academic research or any other kind of research with the archives. It's a real institute, but it's also an incredible thing. And my favorite part about it is comedy is the thing that connects us all. We all laugh at the same things, even though we're so politically divided in this country. I mean, we all will laugh at someone slipping on a banana peel till the day we die. So you'll be sitting there and there's like one thing that's called the big continuum wall where you go up and you kind of hit your thing and it kind of shows you some bigger things. And suddenly what it does is there's 9 people on the continuum wall. They've all done the thing with the wristband. And your exploration and who you like is connecting to people all over the wall. And you're looking down at the wall and you're looking at the people that you think, oh, I wouldn't say 2 words to that person. And yet, oh, they're a fan of that same person and we're laughing at the same things. And it's a connection that is above and beyond this grievance political world we live in, these silos we live in. It unsilos you in many ways. Laughter unsilos you. So it's a dream of a place. It's between the Rock and Roll Museum and Niagara Falls. That's basically what it is. It's on a corridor where you can go to Cleveland and then you can go to Niagara and there's all these other things. 40 million people live within 5 hours of this place. It's in the middle of nowhere and yet it's not. And every single comic who's come into town, because they have a big festival once a year and we have a little thing at Chautauqua we do. Every comic that's come into town to work the festival goes through that museum, and some of them come out with tears in their eyes. Some of them are in awe. Some of them are ready to donate all of their archives. They are so honored that we are doing the work of telling the story of comedy and why comedy is important in our culture, and who are the people that have made this art form so incredible.
Yeah, you would never get me out of there. I could talk comedy forever. And I love all the older trailblazing comedians.
You have to come up to see this place.
I will definitely do that. One of my favorite early comedians, and she doesn't get talked about like Phil Stiller and Joan Rivers, but I think she was a huge trailblazer, was Jean Carroll. She did a bit about being in the hospital, and I think it was 1955, which is a little bit later in her career. But you watch that 70 years later, and I would say 80% still holds up. Because a lot of comedy is done in the moment with pop culture, etc. If you can do comedy and it holds up decade after decade, to me, that's what makes a true comedian and a true artist.
And there's the anthropologist, right? You're just observing the human condition and the human culture of the time and finding the things that we all have to deal with. There's another pioneer comic, Rusty Warren, another woman. We have Rusty Warren's archive. We've got a spotlight on some of her material. No one knows who she is. Huge pioneer. Triple X albums that people used to play in their homes for cocktail parties. The HBO show about the comedian. That's basically Rusty Warren. Like they kind of amalgamized a bunch of people, but that's part of it. So yeah, you need to come up, Rob. You will love it.
There's a pro wrestling gimmick right now. Her name is Toni Storm, but she is a combination of Rusty Warren and Betty Davis. But you should watch just her cut a promo, and you would sit there and say, it's the marriage of those two personalities.
That's incredible. That's great.
Like I said, I could talk comedy all day, but it's something where comedy and I think sports are the same thing where they're uniters. It doesn't matter what background, what ethnicity, what faith, etc. is. You're a fan of the Dallas Cowboys, you're a fan of George Carlin. It just brings people together and it breaks down all those barriers in literally 2 seconds.
Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful observation.
One last thing before I let you go, we've kind of touched on it a little bit here, is you won an Emmy in 2022 for your work on George Carlin, The American Dream, which was directed by Judd Apatow. What was it like to work with Judd? Because he's more so, at least to me, known more as like, I would say, a comedy person and not so much a documentarian.
He did win an Emmy for the Gary Shandling documentary.
But I would say he's more known as a comedy person.
I think he's known as a director-writer. He started on Freaks and Geeks as a writer. He was a protege of Gary Shandling's. directed big comedy films. But it was during the pandemic. I mean, we signed the deal and 2 weeks later, the pandemic hit. And so it was Judd Apatow and Michael Bonfiglio, who were the co-directors. Michael did all of the interviews. Judd and Michael, they collaborated on other documentaries. We also had an incredible editor who should have won the Emmy. But basically, I just handed everything over to Judd. I was an executive producer, basically because I control my dad's legacy and his intellectual property with my dad's manager, Jerry Hamza. So we were the executive producers. So I basically gave Judd access to all the archives I had, all the archives I donated to the National Comedy Center, which are still technically my intellectual property, even though they have the actual objects. And Gary Shandling was a mentor of mine after my dad died. So I knew what he had done for Gary in Gary's documentary in revealing Gary's spiritual side and really leaned into that part of the story. So when we had our short list of directors, Judd came up. He clicked every single box for me. High emotional intelligence, great storyteller, great reverence for comedy, totally comedy nerd, knows everything about comedy, studied the history, everything about it already. Funny, and he's a good guy. And we just handed everything to him. And November of that year, I sat down for my first interview, big, long 5-hour interview, unpacked all my family stuff. Wayne Fetterman, another comedian, writer, he was a co-producer on it. He would sit outside. He was kind of my personal historian. I would say, I think that was 1968. And he'd go, oh, no, Kelly, that was 1967. I'm like, oh, thank you, Wayne. He had my memoir, all marked and everything. And then end of 2021, I did one more interview. Everything was set. Judd sent me the rough cut. I'd not seen anything. Hands off the whole time. Completely left it in his hands. Sends me the rough cut. It's so terrifying. You're like, oh my God. I said, I'm just going to watch the first 10 minutes because it's really emotional for me too, to see my dad and videos. It's a grief ride for me half the time. Watch the first 10 minutes, was so brought in by the first 10 minutes. I was like, oh, this is really, really great. Watch the first 45 minutes, realized, I said to Bob, my husband, I'm like, I'm in this thing. I'm really in it. And this is when I realized that all the work I'd done on myself and in my stories and the work it took for me to do my solo show and my memoir and the stance I had with my parents now after being through all of that and knowing that I'm the only survivor to really be able to tell these stories, of course, that Judd had really woven it in such a beautiful way and used it in the way that he used it. I was just very proud of that. I was very proud that my personal work and my creative work added to it without me ever saying anything. That was a choice by the directors to do that. So I was honored that it worked. And then when we won the Emmy, I really felt like this documentary was an elevation in some ways. It could have been very much just a career documentary. The one thing I said to Judd before everything is I do not want this to be a marathon of talking head comedians talking about my dad's comedy. I know you're going to have some of that. And the way he used visuals in it was so incredible. He just did such a great job. And I feel so honored to have been a part of that. And then when we were at the Emmys, we won and we walked up to the stage and Judd Apatow and Michael backed away and gestured to the microphone and said, this is your moment, and gave me the moment. Such generosity, such generosity.
I'm going to ask you, I'm an Emmy winner as well, although in the sports world, where do you have your Emmy?
It's right on my mantle in my living room. She's bright and shiny and she brings joy to everyone who holds her. I make people walk in and go, you want to hold her? You want to hold her? Because the minute they do, they're like, oh my God, this is so great. I'm like, I know. The pictures of me after winning it, I've never felt such a bigger beam of joy. Plus I told a joke and it killed in the room. It was a great night. Absolutely fantastic night. It was so much fun.
Kelly, I want to thank you so much for joining the I Play Too podcast today and talking about your stories about your dad, your mom, working with Judd Apatow, and all the great things that you've experienced along with your life. Thank you so much for sharing. Take care, and best of luck with your Humans on the Verge podcast and what you're doing to help out so many people. Take care, and thanks again.
Rob, thank you for having me. It was a wonderful and rich conversation.